So I'm really happy. I almost want to say honored, but I think that's a weird word. Um, Happy that I have Rand Fishkin on the line. Thank you, Rand, for talking with us.
Oh
We
my gosh, Erno, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Because the funny thing is you were on my radar for a long time. I've been following you for a long time, especially your writing and your Whiteboard Fridays and so on. It, it I I'm not really deep into SEO, but it is when you blog and you write and you have a website and you do pretty well. SEO is always on the radar, right? So you're always interested in, can I do this better? Can I make this better? Can I be better in the search engine? So it's always in the radar, and you've been always on my radar for that point. And I remember, especially when I think it was last year when you were here for an event with Yoast, with the Yoast
Oh yeah,
plugin,
that's right.
the Yoast event, Yoast Con, I think it is called. And I thought about it. I saw you mentioning it, that you were coming to the Netherlands and going to Yoast. And I thought about, okay, I should follow him and track him down and send him some messages and see if we can meet when you are in Nijmegen. But that didn't happen. And so now this opportunity came, and you invited some people to look at SparkToro, your new software tool, your new company. And I said, well, I want to look at it, but I'm not sure if it's for the Netherlands, and it isn't really for the Netherlands right now. It may be in the future. And maybe you want to be in a podcast. And you said yes, and I was so happy.
Well, I'm
um,
uh, I'm thrilled to be here, and yeah. I'm sorry we missed each other when I
oh,
was out there, but
that was my
uh,
fault. I didn't
we were there. We were
pursue.
there for such a short time. I think we were only in the Netherlands 3 days, maybe three or
Yeah,
four
yeah,
days.
but I
Yeah.
didn't pursue, so it's not your fault. And we were just talking about before we start this conversation for the podcast. We started talking about the time now, the COVID-19 situation, and working from home and the relationship. And what I always think is funny slash interesting is your conversation with your wife Geraldine on Twitter. It's like you make these jokes. you, you're sitting across. I can see you sitting across each other on the couch, and then you're making jokes on Twitter. That's so. I think it's so funny.
I mean, Geraldine is, she's a writer, she's a humorist, she's a published author, so she's hilarious and fun to be around all the time. And yeah, her online voice is just so delightful, right? So enjoyable, and yeah, being able to lean into that, especially because we both sort of have social followings in different sectors. That's been really fun.
I agree. I agree. I love her tweets. I love her vision and her view on things, and the delight that she sees in things. I love it. So I didn't know her before, but I saw you communicating. Well, who is she? And then I understood. Oh, it's her wife. It's his wife. And okay, let's follow Geraldine. And since then, I see all these funny conversations going on. That's really funny. Um, I've there's a couple of things that I would love to talk about. I don't have really a lot of questions really written down, but I have topics that I've written down. And a part of comes from your book, Lost and Founder, um, which is a a really hands-on book when you are a founder, a business owner. You are in the process of growing a company or starting a company. It has all these different kind of angles of the position where the company is and how large it is and all your experiences. So it's really interesting. And then, of course, you started your new business, SparkToro. So I want to talk about that a bit. And let's begin because I'm going to ask you some questions which are really obviously written in the book, but a lot of people wouldn't have read the book, and I read the book, and I want them to buy the book. So let's tease them
Okay.
into the book.
Sounds good. I'm
Because
sure
I
you and my publisher will be very happy about this.
no, but I think the book is really interesting if you are a business owner
Yeah.
and you want to learn about how you have grown the business Mars to a 40 million revenue per year business. With how many employees were at that moment there?
Let's see. When I stepped down as CEO, I think Moz was around 30, yeah, maybe 38 million something in revenue, around there, and about 150 employees.
Right.
And today it's 200 some odd employees and maybe around 55 million.
That's a phase that a lot of people, business owners, don't get to. So it's a very interesting story to read, an interesting book to read if you want to learn more about what's happening in those phases, and especially when you are also using venture capital
Yeah,
money,
right.
right?
Yeah, I think that is part of the, part of the reason I wanted to tell the story in Lost and Founder was to help folks not make the same mistakes that I made. And I think one of the mistakes fundamentally that I made was raising investment capital. Um, One of the strangest things that I think you can take away from Lost and Founder, or really from almost any venture capital backed company that doesn't have a $1 billion exit, or let's say north of 300-400 million. And one of the big takeaways that I have had is that those companies are far less successful for their employees, their founders, and their customers than a $4 million a year business that's profitable and sort of owned by the founders or has an alternative investment structure. Just because the math of venture is very bifurcated. You and I were chatting before the podcast, right, about income inequality and sort of the graphs that we've all seen around almost all the gains go to the people in the top 10th of a %, whatever. And venture capital is certainly a vehicle for that.
Yeah.
Right? Because they invest in, 100, you and I start a fund, we invest in 100 companies. 96 of those companies are going to not meet our investment potential, investment return minimums. 2 or 3 might return decent amounts. For us, that might be a couple $100 million exit or something like that. And then hopefully 1 or 2 make the whole fund, right? And so, of course, that means all the gains are going to the winners at the very top. And then you have a huge swath of companies, founders, employees, partners, providers, service providers, and customers who are very unhappy, right? Because they had a bad time. And as a venture capitalist, I think you have to sort of get immune to that. Like, okay, I'm going to make a lot of people very angry and a couple of people very rich.
That must be an odd job. That must be a very. You must have a thick skin.
Yeah, I think even if you don't start with one, you have to get there eventually. And my investors, as I talked about them, a lot in the book. I like them. I think they are fundamentally good people, but I don't know that the incentive model and structure of venture is ideal even for them,
Yeah.
right? I think fundamentally, I think my investors, Brad and Michelle, Seth, I think they would have been happier in another type of funding situation. I'm not sure that I don't know if that's like hit them yet, but I don't know if it ever will hit them, right? 'Cause we often sort of, when we are in systems, we make, I don't know, mental models and constructs to try and convince ourselves that we like what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that brings me to the conclusion that you will never again get to a venture capitalist for SparkToro.
Yeah, I think SparkToro intentionally, right? We raised money in this very alternative scheme. So we have an LLC, which is a limited liability company, and essentially, Casey and I are partners in that, and then our investors own shares or units in that LLC, and they can participate in profit sharing and dividends. And we basically, once we get them their money back, then we sort of can participate in profit sharing as well. So it's a good incentive structure for us to become a profitable, sustainable business. And for for our investors, they basically have the incentive of, oh, we want to see SparkToro succeed, but at any outcome, right? They're very happy. If SparkToro becomes a $1 million a year business, well, that's not great, but it's pretty good, and they'll be fine and we'll be fine. If it's a $5 million a year business, they're going to be thrilled. 10, thrilled. 100, thrilled. Right? So I like that model because I think when you start a new company, you don't know what it's going to be. You don't know where along the distribution curve you fall, how big the market is going to be for sure, how well you're going to do for sure. And so why would you build yourself a structure where you essentially fail at all these, levels of growth and success, as opposed to give yourself the maximum flexibility to be successful at any number? And I find it very, very strange that that we have this asset class, venture capital, that exists the way it does. I realize why it exists. It's a complicated political tax dodge situation, but it's just very odd, right?
Why? I'm just asking questions, right? So
Yeah,
why
yeah.
is it not possible to start SparkToro just with save money from you and Casey? So
I mean, we
don't
just
have
didn't
it,
have, we don't have enough, right? We did not. So
but
we raised
you,
1.3 million,
right?
and we have, it took us a couple of years to build the product and sort of get off the ground. And in that time, we spent just about half that, so getting to launch essentially. And now that we're at launch, right, we're closing the gap to profitability. So hopefully we'll get to profitability before we are, say, at a quarter, run out of about 3/4 of our investment fund. But I think we played it pretty well. If I were to go back in time, I would not have raised any less money.
But is there no model that you can foresee where you could just do this in a bootstrap ways, where you just
Oh, sure. Yeah.
build on clients that are coming in?
I think we could have built probably like a consulting business at first, and then as we, grew up, sort of built a software business. I think it would have taken much longer. We probably would have had, I don't know, 4 to 5 years of trying to build up that consulting business, and then a few years of trying to build it into a software business. And I am no longer in my 20s or even my 30s, so I think I'd much rather accelerate that process. And also, to be honest, I intentionally wanted to build an alternative investment structure because I want to try and model for angel investors and for companies and founders. I want to try and model an alternative. I want to show people that you don't have to raise venture, that you can do this in another way. Even if raising money is something that you need to do, which not everyone needs to do, right? You can bootstrap certain things, if you've got the right income. But you're probably aware too that in the United States, bootstrapping a business is extraordinarily risky because your healthcare is tied to your employment, and healthcare is extremely expensive here. Casey and I spend almost as much on our healthcare as we do on our salaries. Just for the two of us and our families. Casey has kids. I don't have kids, but I'm married. And so, yeah, you take a big risk there. But I want in 5 or 10 years, I want a lot of founders to say, gosh, this venture model, I'm not sure that's right for me. Can I use the SparkToro model and do that instead? And what's been really cool is 3 or 4 startups now have taken our open sourced investment documents and used them to raise money for their own companies. And a tiny seed fund out of Minneapolis has raised money, they raised money and they put money into companies using the SparkToro model as well. So it's sort of cool. Like, maybe it's getting a little snowball rolling down the hill effect.
So I didn't read about that. I didn't know that, but you're telling me you have, because I was just going to ask that. So are you going to write up the process? But you already have the documents are open.
Yeah.
So where can people find this?
So if you search for SparkToro funding in Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo, whatever search engine you want, you'll find the blog post, and that blog post has a link to the Google Drive with the open source documents. So anyone can use those. We paid our attorneys a little extra to sort of open source them so they can be fill in the blanks for anybody to use. And I really do encourage founders. It's not a complicated model at all, and it is very, very fair and equitable to founders and to investors. The only people who really dislike it are folks who don't like paying taxes, right? Because essentially, and this is why venture capital exists overall, right? Venture capital exists because it lets investors get the capital gains rate on their investment. And so, I don't know, this is all complicated tax, US tax, blah, 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 whatever. But in the SparkToro model, we pay normal taxes. Right. And so I think
that's fair, right?
Not only is it fair, right? I am building a company on the back of the internet, which was created by my government using tax dollars to help build this, all sorts of technology that we're using, all sorts of IP that we're using, the roads that we use to travel back and forth between our houses, the electricity that comes to our houses, right? The toilets that we can flush, like all those things are government funded. And so I feel wonderful paying taxes. I love paying taxes. Charge me more, right? So yeah, but I'm unusual for an American in this respect.
No, and the fun thing, of course, is that to me this sounds very logical, right? So I think that is right now in the Netherlands, for example, you can apply for social support because of the COVID-19 situation. So when you have a company and people are in trouble, you could apply for money, which you can get or even loan. And now there are companies that have a office in the Netherlands, but are operated worldwide, and they don't pay taxes here, but they apply for money from the government to help keep this business going in the Netherlands to pay these employees, which is weird is a understatement, right? So weird is a really understatement because that's kind of stupid.
Yeah. It doesn't sound fair to.
No, for me, paying taxes is really a fair solution if you want an environment in your country, in your state or local city, whatever, where you support each other. Whereas when people don't have enough money, where they have a rough time, they can get money, and when you have a good time, you pay money to the government. And it's not a perfect situation, but it's better than just saying, okay, it's all me and forget about all the other ones. And at the moment when you are in trouble, you can also get money, right? So for me, it's a really fair situation. So I like the idea when you say, I love paying taxes. Of course, it doesn't feel good when you have to pay so much money to the government, but I like the system. I really like the system.
I mean, my hope is I'd love to pay more taxes and get more services.
Right.
Anyone who, I ran a company of 150, 200 people. To me, anyone, who's complaining, well, the government is inefficient or, it's a big bureaucracy. I don't know how they get anything done. Governments have 1 million employees or whatever it is. It's a miracle to me that the mail gets delivered. It's a miracle to me that, we have a CDC, that we have a military, right? Any of these things. I think they're doing extraordinary work. I know how tough it is to manage 50 people, right? And get anything done. So you're telling me that, you're complaining that potholes take 6 months to fix? Whatever. To me, they're incredible.
And I think that's why I love talking about this part with you, because this view on life, on how the world works, you only get because you have had a business which is like 50 to 150 people.
Sure.
And you don't get this vision when you are like 1 to 10 people in a company, because then you have minor problems, right? So you don't understand all the other ones who have really major problems. Coming back to the part where I talked about bootstrapping, because actually that was the way that you started your first company.
Right. Yeah.
with your mom.
Yeah.
Which I thought it was a really interesting start of the book, how you started your business with mom, and especially with the part about the money and the debt and
Yeah, we did the worst possible kind of startup funding, credit card debt, which I don't recommend to anyone. Very bad idea.
and what I one part which I also wrote a blog post about it really got to me was about the transparency. And you write about that being honest is not the same as being transparent.
Yeah.
And I thought about that, and I thought in my values, my personal core values is honesty, right? So I hate it when people lie. I hate it when they do that. I cannot stand people that do that. But then I thought about your position. I thought about actually it's transparency, because it's not about telling the truth, because then you can just always say a lot of things not. You can just leave things out. And I thought it was a wonderful point. And is that because in the book you talk about your values? Is it still close to the values that you have written down for Moz?
I think that those values very much represent me personally. And no surprise, the author of TagV, the six-letter acronym that Moz's values come from, was Geraldine, right? That was my wife, who basically, she knew me really well. I think we weren't even married at the time. Yeah, I think that was before we got married, and she sort of identified what made me tick and what I loved and didn't. And that worked really well for the small, when Moz was small and when it was sort of like really, my company. And then as we grew, right, of course, we raised funding. So now we have a board of directors. We've got more, a bigger leadership team. Of course, I stepped down from the CEO role in 2014, and that transition kind of changed things. And so one of the things that I think is odd today is Moz still sort of has TagV as part of its culture, but I think it's not really a great match anymore. And I would not necessarily suggest to companies that they maintain the values of former founders after the company leaves. Like, one of the things I've been urging leadership to do, because I'm still on the board of directors, is I'm like, hey, you should change this up. Like, this is not who you are anymore, right? Moz certainly doesn't have the same level of transparency. Most folks are not very familiar with Moz's CEO and what she believes and thinks and how she's building the company. And I think that's intentional, right? She's not, she doesn't have that sort of same, whatever you want to call it, predilection for transparency, which is fine.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you gotta be willing to change that up over time as things change.
Because if I remember right, the moment that you with Geraldine came to this TagV, what does it stand for? TagV: transparency,
authenticity, generosity, fun, empathy, and the exception.
Right. So then you were with about 30 people?
Yeah, maybe even smaller than that, probably in the 20 to 30 range.
So it wasn't just you, it wasn't just your values, it was the value combined of those people, right?
Yeah, we sort of did an exercise where we all filled out some forms. You know what? Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we were all together in the room working on it, and there was only maybe 11 of us. So right. we were even smaller than that. But no surprise, right? I think people were recruited by me, and so they were people who kind of by nature shared my values and style, and I think they were strongly influenced by the culture, even if it hadn't been expressed yet, but the culture and values that they were inside of in the company. And so there was that recognition, reflected in the values exercise too.
And you write about the book also about diversity in your team. Did you have a diverse team at that moment, or was it pretty?
Let's see. We had maybe mildly diverse. I'm remembering back to like our first 11 or 12 folks. It was relatively gender diverse. We were probably, right around 40, 60 women, men. It was, I think it was probably 80% white. So, pretty white team. Well, depends what you count, but yeah, white and Jewish, right? I think it's, Jews lobbied the U.S. government in the 1970s to be counted as white. So, for historical reasons, they didn't want to be marked down as like a separate ethnicity. We had we've always had a significant presence of women on our leadership team, right? Obviously, my mom and I being co-founders, the SEOmoz's CEO, Sarah Bird, who was our chief operating officer for a long time before that. Our first investor was Michelle Goldberg. So we had the board of directors was 3 women and me for a long time. And then we had, I think like most tech companies, we had just sort of overwhelmingly men in the engineering team.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
And then much more diversity in other places.
How much do you think that this, especially this female presence in your company, influenced the values of the company, or maybe even your values?
Yeah, well, so I, on the stylistic gender roles spectrum, right? If it's sort of whatever classic, 1950s American male over here, and sort of very feminine over here. For a guy, I fall pretty far in this direction, right? I'm just not. I mean, you can see, right? Like my style, who I am, the values I have, what I care about. But I fall on the more feminine end of the male spectrum, and I've always kind of like that, right? I don't really love the tough guy thing. I have friends like that, and they're fine, right? I don't mind, but I think that's a part of who I am, and certainly, yeah, I think that Moz's culture was strongly influenced by the fact that it was a relatively, especially for a tech startup at its time frame, right, when most tech startups were exclusively men, all male founders, even to this day. I don't know if you've seen the stats on this, but in the United States, at least, the last 5 years, more venture capital has gone to men named John than all women combined.
That's terrible. That's just
terrible. It's pretty awful, right? So venture has a serious problem. The startup world has a serious problem, and Moz, I guess, from that perspective, right? It's a much more gender balanced team. Still a pretty darn white team, but we had some more diversity for good stretches of time. I think now the leadership team is quite white, but it wasn't for a good number of years there.
Do you think that, can you point something in your younger years that caused this setting? I don't know, preset of you. I don't know how to call this. I don't have the right words.
I mean, part of it for sure. Let's see, whatever you want to call it, the more classic, male gender folks in my upbringing were not. I definitely did not have friend groups like that, and I was a shrimpy kid who got beat up a lot, so I kind of had that like negative association with big, the bigger kids being bullies, almost all exclusively boys. And that probably had an impact on me, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I have this question all the time with our friends' kids, right? How much of who they are is they're like that when they come out, right? Like, when I meet babies, they sort of have a little bit of personality, and then you can see that growing into who they are as kids. And there are absolutely right things parents can do to kind of channel that and nurture certain things and not nurture others. But there's definitely, there's definitely something we're born with, right?
Yeah,
We're a little bit who we are from day one.
but it is an interesting thing to talk about. I always, in my conversations, I always try to go back to the beginning to find out in the process to find out what happened there, and later on I can see connections why things went in this direction, which I always find very interesting.
Well, and I think this is an incredibly useful skill, right? If you can have this knowledge about yourself,
right?
If you can know who you are and what works for you and doesn't, and what your why you are the way you are, I think you can make a lot of more thoughtful, emotionally intelligent decisions around your own biases. And some of that is leaning into those biases, and some of that is sort of saying, well, this is an unhealthy one and I want to change it. But for me, for example, I discovered in my 18 years, 17 years at Moz that I don't love leading a large team. I don't really love having a large team. I like small, right? And so when I started SparkToro with Casey, we had conversations about, hey, what do you want to grow this into? Assuming that this thing turns out to be a success, do you want to build a company of 50, 100, 200 people? And we both said, no, we like to keep it small. And so that was we were really good matches as founders because, we want to build a structure that allows the business to scale, but not on the people side so much. And so I think, it wouldn't surprise me if 5 years from now we have a team of 15 to 25. It would surprise me very much if the team is much larger than that.
I think it's for most business owners, this is a very difficult thing, because of course, you obviously have already built a larger business with many more people. Now you know the things that you learn from that, but if you are starting, say, from 10 people, and slowly it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows, and at one point you just find out, okay, this somehow tipped over a point where I don't like it anymore. So I think it's a very difficult thing to decide how big you want to grow your company up front. Do you have any tips how you could do this? How because you have already had the experience of both sides.
Well, let's see. Do you mean how to get to the place where you understand your own
limitations,
mental, like psychology, or do you mean like how do you build a small team?
No, if some people have now that I work with have generally about to say 8 to 25 people.
Okay.
And when you look at general economics, people think a company has to grow, right? So you want to serve more customers, and the company grows with that. But you have no idea if you are really looking forward to that situation. If you are at 5 people, you think, oh, 10, that's enough. But when you're at 10, you think, 15, that's okay. And then you go to 23, and then you go to, so it's very, I remember having this conversation with a owner of an engineering company, electrical engineering. And he said, well, I started the company, I took over from my dad. My dad didn't want any employees. And then when I took over, I wanted to hire the first employees because I thought it was an impossible situation. We wanted to grow. We had more jobs coming towards us that we could handle. And I don't want to work 80 hours a week.
Right.
So he started hiring first freelancers, and then he discovered the negativity, the issues with freelancers, that they always are with one leg in your company and the other one that you're looking for other jobs. And so he's hired his first people. Then he says, okay, I don't want to grow this bigger at 8. Then it was 12. Then it was 18. Then it was 25. Now he's at 25 people, I believe he's about. So he's still growing. He's doing a great job. But how do you find out what your limit is? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, for me at least, I think we have to go through some experiences to know whether they're right or wrong for us, right? And be open to them. And some of it is also being very mindful about how you're building that, right? So, it's not, for me, it is not a strict number. It's more when does inter-team tribalism start to happen inside a company?
Okay,
right?
Explain.
So, human beings have sort of a natural tendency to form groups and then to sort of have like an in-group and an out-group. And this can be a positive thing, but it can also be a very negative thing. One of the good things about capitalism, one of the few really good things about capitalism, is it takes the in-group, out-group mentality and creates competition that leads to better products and services, right? So we form our little teams, and my electrical engineering company is competing against those electrical engineering companies, and we have to keep getting better and better and better about service and product and pricing and structure and how we help people in order to beat them, and they have to do the same with us, right? And so we have this competition that leads to innovation and progress in lots of good ways. But when that gets turned inward, right, when it becomes your engineering team and your customer service team get antagonistic toward each other, your marketing team and your finance team get antagonistic towards each other, that's where I really don't like it. And that is almost impossible to avoid at 200 people and very easy to avoid at 4 people, right? And in between those numbers, it gets more challenging. And so for me, right, the size restriction is, where's that comfort level? Where can I make it, it's our team, all of us against the world rather than against each other. Mm-hmm. And I found at Moz that started happening right about 40, 50 people, right? That's where it started to become unmanageable. And I think that's based on interpersonal relationships, right? So right around the 30, 40 people mark, everyone still knew each other, right? And there was, if you and I were having a conversation, we wouldn't say, well, engineering told me they can't get to it until next month. We would have the conversation and say, oh, Casey and Devin said they can't get to it until next month. And that is just a huge difference, right? Massive difference between these two people that we know and like versus the engineering team.
Them.
Yeah, them, exactly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, yes. And despite these, the knowledge that you have now, you somehow postponed stepping down as CEO until 2014, which the company was at like 100 people or something, right?
100, yeah, maybe 160, somewhere around there.
Oh my gosh, 160 people. So you feel comfortable until 40, and you still keep on doing your job until like 160 people, and really decide then that this is I can't continue this.
Well, yeah, and I don't think I really had the, I wish what I had was sort of this mature, broad perspective, but I didn't really get that until years later. I think instead, what I had was overwhelming anxiety and panic and, just kind of an internal emotional nightmare situation and depression. And that's what sort of nudged me to have a conversation with my board and say, hey, I'm in a really bad place. I think I need something different. Let's promote our chief operating officer to the CEO role, and I'll sort of step back a little bit. And then that ended up being not a great feeling and fit for me either. And so I sort of struggled for another 4 years at the company and then finally left.
What do you think can, because I believe this, and you write about that in the book, that you wrote a blog post before an event and you saw the recognition in the audience of this situation. What can founders, business owners do to prevent or make it easier to not fall into this difficult situation where you are in so much stress and anxiety and in the end almost get sick from your state?
Yeah, well, let's see. I think all of the research that I've seen on mental health and depression, anxiety, emotional health, all those kinds of things, is that it's a very complex situation. And often it is not necessarily catalyzed by a particular event, right? So we might say, oh, well, I had a tough breakup, for example, and that spiraled into depression. But very often when you sort of reverse engineer it, it's no, you started spiraling into depression and that led to a breakup. And so cause and effect is very different. I think that's the same thing's true for me. I don't know that the situation at Moz was causing me to become, this sort of mentally unhealthy person, or whether it was mental unhealthiness that was causing me to have negative effects on my business and the people around me. So very hard to reverse engineer cause and effect. In terms of, that being said, in terms of prevention or in terms of maintaining mental health, the things that work consistently for people are sort of behavior modification that is adhered to with some consistency. Human beings are, we are living organisms, but we have these complex minds, but we also do really, really well with some structured systems, and things like getting a consistent amount of enough sleep. So 9 hours in bed and 8 hours of sleep is very, very well correlated with strong mental health, right? And great performance. Most of the professional athletes in the world get more than 8 hours of sleep a night.
And why
right?
is
And yet
that?
business people, like, we're insane. We somehow wear it like a badge of honor. Oh, I only slept 12 hours last week. But you're obviously not working well. You're not doing a good job. That's not, you shouldn't be proud of that. So I think there's sleep, exercise, and eating well. Those things are also very well correlated. Having regular conversations with someone about your mental health, a professional. So, counseling, therapy, that is very well correlated. And if you are having severe issues, for many people, medication works as well. There's a number of studies suggesting that if some of your mental or emotional health issues are caused by trauma, that trauma therapy can be very, very helpful. There's a surprising amount of people who seem to get through their experiences or have a more positive experience when they are microdosing on psychedelic mushrooms. And there's like a bunch of studies around that coming out that are now getting funding, and that might become something that the medical community at large recognizes in the next 10 years. It wouldn't surprise me.
I know that Timothy Ferris is also in that area working. Okay,
yeah, I haven't heard his stuff on it, but I have a cousin-in-law, a cousin of Geraldine's, who's a therapist and a doctor, and he is part of a study looking into this, a university-funded, sort of state-funded study looking into the effects of these various compounds on folks with these problems. So yeah, I think there's options, and there's things you can invest in, but I wasn't doing any of this stuff, right? I was not sleeping well. I was not exercising. My diet was not great. I was not talking to a therapist regularly. None of the basics were things that I was doing. And so those certainly have helped me over time, but yeah.
I what I like about the part, there's two things. There are two separate parts in the books, two separate parts in the book. First, you talk about how you build up the marketing of SEOmoz at the time, which is called now Moz, is where you've written like 1,000 articles before it actually, you got traction, you got a decent audience that likes it, and you wrote and made content in the evenings. So you work during the day in the office, then you go home or you stay in the office, I'm not sure, and then you do all this content thing. And that already, when I read this, I got, oh, okay, so this is 12 hours a day, right? So doing the work and then doing the content thing, that's 12 hours. But also you write about now in the end of the book, you talk about how you would do this thing differently is, for example, you would find 100 customers that would be interested in what you were doing, interview them all, and change or build a product that aligns with the issue that they want to tackle, and also make content around that topic. So you build your network first, then
network, then expertise and community, and then sort of the product and the content to go with it, right? And I think this model, I've seen a ton of people who follow that path be much more successful with their startup once they launch it, because they already have an audience of people who care about what they're doing and know them and like them and trust them. I think what's really, really hard is to sort of go into your basement, right? Interview some customers, some potential customers, go into your basement, build that product, launch it, and then sort of hope that somehow people will hear about it, and then start doing marketing after you launch. You know, when we launched SparkToro in March and April, we had 20,000 people who'd put their email onto a list to get notified, right? So those are all potential customers who looked at the SparkToro product under construction, right? Sort of a page pitching what we were building and said, that sounds really interesting. I'm interested in that. Hook me up when it's ready, right? And of those 20,000 people, that's where we got our first 100 customers. And SparkToro is, I think, on the road to profitability because we had that group, even though we launched in a pandemic. And, if that hadn't been the case, maybe we would have had 400 or 500 customers from that 20,000 email list. But I think there's so much value in building up that marketing before you have your product. It makes a world of difference. And Moz did it unintentionally, right? Because we had this consulting business. I was blogging, so we built up this community. And then when we launched the software, it kind of took off, even though the software was crap. And there was not much SEO software out there. So there you go.
It was a bad connection moment, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I got your point. Interesting point that you touched there was the idea of the consulting and creating content, because I read that part again and I thought about this part. So you at that point you had a lot of content, you build a bigger audience, which is actually kind of too big for the consulting. So then for this kind of audience, a product-based kind of company is more logical. That's how I read it.
I think that is true. Well, certainly a product-based company that can scale without adding tons of people to consult, it is certainly a higher profit margin and potentially higher benefit to everyone, right? To founders and employees and to customers, because one customer who's benefiting from software that you built 10 more, 100 more, 1,000 more can benefit from that same software. Whereas if you're doing consulting, right, it's only the client who's really getting the benefit of the consulting at one point. So it lends itself well to the model, certainly. And I think that content is a great way to build up a community of people who care about you, but it's not the only way.
No, but
I've seen.
I had the question that I had for me was the other way around, right? So if I'm like me, if I'm a business coach or am I in consulting, is it then a waste of time to spend a lot of energy into creating content and building a community?
I think it's not necessarily a waste, and you can see, a number of consulting and services-based businesses who've done extraordinarily well by building that up. What I would say is, I would be very intentional about focusing how I balance the content creation and community building with the goals of the business, right? So what can happen, and certainly what was happening for me, was that over time, I was pouring as much or more effort into the content and community side as I was into the services side, and was not building a great services business or a scalable services business, or we were barely struggling at the edge of profitability. I was making $30,000 a year, less than that. My mom sometimes wasn't taking home a paycheck, and yet we had thousands of people visiting our website and checking out our content and liking what we were doing. So the model didn't work great. It was mostly a passion project. However, that being said, I have seen consultancies, as they grow, start to invest in whatever, an events business, a company like Distilled, right? Built up a great events business that then flowed into their consulting business really well. It worked well with their content business as well, right? They could take the talks and the presentations and turn that into content. That some of it was gated. They built up an online education stuff around that. You can see Seer Interactive out in Philadelphia and San Diego, right? They've built up a content practice as they've grown. And so I think what's wise is they've sort of taken, both those companies and many others like them have taken the content community investment and right-sized it to the growth of their businesses, right? They balanced that out. Whereas what I was doing in my early days was, was this.
Yeah, and I'm asking this because maybe I am doing the same thing. So that's why it's very reflective.
And part of it's not a bad thing, right? If that's your passion and you're doing it because it is enjoyable for you and you love I've described this to many people. Like, there's a hole in my chest. You can't see it, but it's like an invisible hole right here, giant hole in my chest. And it can only be filled by the praise and comments and engagement of thousands of people on the internet who are getting value from the content that I create. And the hole drains itself, right? It has to be refilled every week. And so if I don't have that constant sort of positive attention from stuff that I'm putting out there, I feel empty. I feel guilty. I feel like I'm doing things wrong. I'm not helping people. I'm not living up to my potential. And so that guilt is a huge driver of why I create content and create a lot of content that, that helps people with no thought of return for the business, right? And I think that's okay. Like, I just know that about myself and I do it anyway. And, I have calls with people and I try and help people regardless of whether it has any positive impact on whatever, me or SparkToro or financial bottom line. Okay, that's something Rand does, right? That's like something I do with my time because I want to, and it makes me feel good and it makes me feel like I'm, a positive contributor to society. But is it tactically and strategically the wisest thing I can do? Maybe not.
Is it still that you work like 8 hours in your business and then all these things that you just described is in the bonus time?
No, not as much anymore.
Okay.
My hours have with SparkToro, my hours have come down significantly. The last couple months with launch ramped back up again. So the answer to your question, the last 2 months would be yes, but the previous 2 years, no. The previous 2 years was very much a, fit the content that I create and the, presentations and traveling conferences and events and speaking, all that kind of stuff. That was within the 40-ish hours a week that I worked.
Oh, cool.
Some weeks even less.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, SparkToro. We have to say something about it. Not have to, but I want to. I was on the list way back, so I got it a peek at the first versions, and I wasn't sure because I saw things that you gathered from Twitter, and and there was a lot of things that I wasn't sure what I could do with that. And obviously, you've immensely improved the product and the service, and it's becoming more clear to me. And I've seen your videos explaining what it really does. It is a great tool, as I see it, for if you want to invest time to build outreach. Is that a good description?
I think, let's see, I would say that people are using it. Some people are using it for outreach, right? PR kinds of outreach, link building outreach, content outreach. But we've been surprised. A lot of folks are using it for other purposes, right? Just classic market research, understanding who's my audience, what do they pay attention to and listen to, so that I can go follow those sources and gain an understanding of them. What attributes, behavioral and some demographic attributes do they have, so that I can better understand and better target them. Some people use it purely for ad targeting, right? So they go into SparkToro, they look at, hey, here's my competitor. How does my competitor's audience describe themselves? Great, those are going to be my new Facebook ad groups, right? So I'm going to target people with those job titles, and I'm going to look at what hashtags they use. I'm going to find the communities they pay attention to. Boom, I'm going to target people who follow this Facebook page and that Facebook page, right, with my ads. So we've seen that. We've seen people who are media buyers who just use it to find the websites that reach the audience they want to reach, so that they can do media buying. We've seen product builders use it for personas, right? The classic persona building exercises. So it's been very broad, and I think that makes me feel good, right? That makes me feel like, okay, this data is useful to a lot of different people. It's challenging as a marketer, right? Like to do marketing to a large group of people and basically say, this is useful to all these people for all these different purposes, is much more difficult than saying, if you are a content marketer who every week needs to find right places to pitch your new content, and social media folks to amplify that content, and podcasts will have you on to talk about that content, blah, blah, blah. This is the product for you, right? And so because we're broad, those narrow sort of, this is a right product for you, customer X, has been a little more challenging. And so I think that will continue to be a little bit of a struggle for us. I think a big part of that is just getting people to try the tool. Right. So this is why we sort of have a very, I don't know what you want to call it, robust or generous, completely free program. You can go in and run a bunch of searches, 10 searches a month, completely for free, see a bunch of data, be like, oh, okay, I get it, right? This architects in Canada listen to this podcast. They follow these 4 YouTube channels. These are the 250 social accounts that they follow the most, and here's what percentage, blah, 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 right? And then the challenge for us is that we have to rely on our customers and our users to sort of know how to take that data and use it. And so some folks, certainly there have been, plenty of people who on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, in my email have been like, okay, this looks cool, but what am I supposed to do with it? And then there have been a bunch of people who are like, oh, thank God, I have been dying for this data. Like we spent $100,000 with a market research firm to survey our audience to try and get this data. And here it is finally for, whatever.
Right.
In 6 seconds, I got it. Incredible, right? So, I think we know that that second audience is going to be the first one that we serve. The people who are like, I have this problem. It's a pain point. I needed this information. They're going to be our first audience. And then the folks who are like, okay, this is cool, but what do I do with it?
Yeah.
That's going to be an audience for the future that we need to nurture and educate.
Yeah. What I think, if you can go to sparktoro.com and you can do some searches yourself, but my tip is that you first watch the videos that Rand put out there, because then you can understand what you can get from the data. Because if you just type in something and you get results, I didn't know what was I going to do with these results. So when I saw your videos, this I can do. So if I do this, I can type in this word and get something that's useful for me or not.
Right. So yeah, like in your example earlier, if you know that a bunch of founders of small businesses in the Netherlands who have 10 to 25 employees and tend to run services-based businesses are your audience, you might say, oh, that's a little bit tough to describe what they frequently talk about, or it's a little bit tough to describe what words they use in their bio. So instead, I know that a ton of them follow this small business website. And so I'm going to use that as my search term. And now I can figure out all the other places that I can go reach those people. And hey, here's someone, here's a social account that a ton of those small businesses in the Netherlands follow. I'm going to get that person on my podcast.
Right.
They're going to, right? You have a perfect platform for attracting that attention organically, right? And so you might say, oh, this is amazing, right? And you might do that for free. Like you don't have to pay for an account, right? That might be something that you just get a lot of value from 2 or 3 free searches, and it helps your business tremendously. Wonderful, great. And then if your business scales and you have a bunch of need in the future for lots more of this kind of data, SparkToro's there. And if not, Casey and I are honestly thrilled to build a business that helps other people, even if it doesn't necessarily mean financial return for us. And we know from experience that if we help lots of people, they will refer people to us, right? It doesn't just end at, oh, well, how can you give this away for free? That's never how it works.
Right. I agree. No, I think that when you try to serve many people, there will always be money there for you.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I've certainly during this pandemic, when so many industries are so hard hit, and then others have much greater demand. There's tons of people who are trying to build e-commerce businesses right now. Tons of people who are trying to build new types of entrepreneurial ventures. I don't know if you've seen the data from like Shopify and Gumroad showing just record levels of new people getting on the platform. Patreon, Kickstarter, right? All these types of businesses. So we're lucky in that we're broad enough to where the folks who are benefiting or seeing increased demand from the pandemic can find SparkToro really useful too. And so that sort of helps make up for some of the, I think, loss that we're experiencing broadly across the economic spectrum.
Right. So let's try to end this slowly. What is it you see is your path for the next 6 months or so?
Well, my expectation is things, unfortunately, in the US, I think are going to get worse before they get better. So you can see sort of a pattern of, and this is true for previous pandemics as well. Granted, it's been like 100 years since we had one, but where essentially things open up too early, which we're seeing in the US, and then there's a second wave, and that makes even more people scared to go out and do anything, and spending pulls back even further. And it looks like the United States is following that model pretty closely.
Netherlands too.
So, yeah. So it's just, we're sort of anticipating that that's going to be the case, and that we're going to have to hunker down and kind of focus on building the business for businesses that see increased demand. And that is mostly sort of, e-commerce. There's a lot of kind of early stage entrepreneurial stuff, a lot of tech, a lot of remote work and work from home resources, all those kinds of things. And then it is absolutely true, in my opinion, that there's a huge amount of pent up demand, right? That people want to go out to restaurants. They want to go to cafes. They want to go to bars again. They want to travel again. They want to jump on planes and fly to Italy and have amazing pasta, right? Which I do too. Like I'm not, I would love to see all our friends and relatives there, and I miss everybody, right? So I think when we get to a stage where either there's a not a cure, but like antivirals and much better treatments, or there's just a vaccine, we're going to see that pent up demand come back and return. And so it's a great time for a lot of people, ourselves included, to be building up our marketing flywheels and building up that future demand, right? Getting people who know us and like us and have tried our product for free and are on our email list. And yeah, maybe they're not customers today, but in 18 months, in 2 years, a lot of them are going to come to us when they need to figure out, hey, okay, the market's coming back. I'm ready to spend on marketing again. Right. Where do I do that?
So, and you say 18 months, 2 years. So that's also kind of like the time frame that you have where you can build up the flywheel on this time.
Yeah. And I mean, we're really lucky that we raised as much money as we did, because it gives us that path, right, to be able to have monthly losses for 12 to 24 months and be okay and make it through. So I think we're going to be all right. We're in a better situation than a lot of people.
You're 150 customers now, which pay you either monthly or a one time a year. What is the about-ish number of customers that you need to be positive?
We're not that far off. I think it's somewhere between 250 and 300.
Oh, okay.
So at our current average revenue per user rate. So, it's very possible that if we keep having growth over the next 6 months, which, we were looking at the numbers and we're sort of like, well, churn is much higher than it usually is, because obviously people's spending is just very restricted, and we're very proactive about getting people to churn. Like one of the things, I never did this at Moz, but 3 days or 2 days before we bill someone for the next time, we send them an email that says like, hey, you're about to get charged. Click this button to cancel if you don't want to get charged, because we don't want you to have to pay us money if you're not using the product.
Right. Which is fair.
Yeah, it's fair, but it's very unusual in a subscription business, right? And
but
I think that
the fair part is I like it because it's not, you don't trick people into something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And we don't want to, right? We have the money to survive this, right? And we have I would much rather have someone over the next 5 years raving about SparkToro, even if they're not a customer, than being a customer for 4 or 5 extra months and then feeling crappy about their experience.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. I think that's a great way of looking at it. The flywheel. You talk about the flywheel. Is that because flywheel is a general term, but is it related to the flywheel that Jim Collins describes?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. I generally talk about it exclusively on the marketing side, but you can build it, into your full business the way Jim Collins describes as well. And, for the marketing side for us, it's really about building up this consistent path where we can keep putting energy into a system, and the returns are greater and greater each time. Right?
And the email list subscribers, that's still the main driver?
No, I think at this point, the main driver is what I would call like a combination of content marketing, PR, customer evangelism and community evangelism, social media marketing, and then some email. I think the free tool is sort of the engine that drives a lot of that. So being able to use the product for free and then attracting web traffic from all these different channels, having people, use the tool for free. A few hundred people a day do that. And then those folks, a few every week turn into paying customers.
Right. So content marketing isn't leading to building a list. It is leading to people into the free tool.
Yeah, and actually, right now it is not a very direct path. It's pretty indirect. I think in the nearish future, we'll probably take, the run your first SparkToro search for free, take that widget and put it into the blog itself and into the content, so that after you read a blog post from me, you sort of have that tool sitting there, and you're like, sure, I'll try a free search. Why not?
Okay, I got that. Now that's great to understand. That's something I wanted to get from you.
And Erno, I apologize. I have another meeting.
Yeah, no,
I'm gonna have to.
I was just thinking, is there something that I need to ask you? I think I don't have any more questions. So that's just timing is just perfect.
Excellent.
Rand, oh my gosh, thank you very much for having this conversation. I learned a ton from reading your book, but also from talking to you about the book and all the extras that you gave there. Thank you for building SparkToro and your ideas about society, taxing, and you just mentioned unsubscribing. So all these things that sounds so human, right? So social. I like that. Thank you very much, and hopefully we talk another time.
I really look forward to it. I hope we get to meet up for that coffee at some point. Take care. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rand.
Cheers.